Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this. My name is Alita Liberman. I am an associate professor in the philosophy department and a CTE, what's it called, faculty affiliate for this year. So I want to make sure we all know each other's names. So if we can go around and just say your name, what department you're in, and that's it.
Addie Tolliver from the CT. Hi.
Aria Cabot Whirlwind. Roseanne Brooks, English graduate student.
John Everett, Operations, Research, and Engineering Management.
Rachel Wright, Bio.
And it looks like we've got Eric on Zoom.
I'm Eric Schmidt. I'm in musicology.
If he's speaking, we can't hear him. Eric, can you try saying something so we can test if we can hear you?
I'm trying to speak now.
I can try to see. Say something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now. But there's an echo.
I'm Eric Schmidt. I'm in musicology. Sorry for the tech hangups.
Great. Welcome. And for the folks who just arrived, we're just introducing ourselves, just saying our name and the department we're in. Hey, Justin. So yeah, just your name and department so we all can know each other.
Department and also the director of the CD.
Great.
Justin, we're just saying my teaching statistics and data science and undergrad student.
Super, welcome.
Justin Fisher, philosophy.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. So the title of my session is Cultivating Conversation in a Culture of Quiet. And I did not coin the term culture of quiet. This comes from my first Skype interview at the job I had before this one, where in my very first Skype interview, one of my future colleagues, I didn't know it at the time whether I would get hired, warned me that the students at this university tend to have a culture of quiet. And I thought, what an interesting thing to say to the person in their first interview, right? That you're trying to possibly recruit. And it was another Methodist school, University of Indianapolis, but a lot smaller, much higher proportion of first-generation students, a much higher proportion of rural students, mostly students from Indiana. And when I started working there, I found this was true. I found that there was sort of this culture of quiet. It took a lot more work to get the students there to participate in class than when I was a TA in California, or when I remember my own undergrad education in New Jersey and people were a lot more forthcoming. And I do think that part of it is regional. There was sort of this sense of Midwestern nice or Midwestern polite that prevents you from saying anything that might be perceived as controversial, which in philosophy is tough because we're always critiquing each other. I think also that part of it was cultural in another way, that a lot of my students were from backgrounds, whether that was their class background, their racial background, their rural versus urban background, their religious background, where speaking up in class, especially when there's an authority figure present, was not something that they were really comfortable with or practiced doing. And so my goal for this session is to give us a chance to brainstorm together about what the causes of a culture of quiet are and how to strategize about some responses. So my first question for all of you, SMU students are a different population than the students in Indianapolis where I taught before, but at least in my experience, I do sometimes encounter what I would call a culture of quiet at SMU. And has this been your experience as well? A lot of people are saying yes. So what does this look like in your experience? Like, what's going on in your classes that motivated you to think, yeah, I could use brainstorming with my colleagues about how to help students be less quiet in class? Yeah, Roseanne.
Culture quiet people. So I have taught writer the last few years. I taught high school before this. I faced much more quietness at SMU than when I was teaching high school. And I've taught at 8 a.m. and I've taught at 1 p.m. and 9 a.m. So I guess where I'm trying to get at here is give you an overview of the times. 8 a.m. is tired, right? Not just tired. They are tired.
Yeah.
1 p.m. they're also tired. And I also taught writer, which is a required class that not a lot of students are super excited about reading. So I think those are the two elements that I faced with the idea of culture of quiet. When students will participate. I think another thing is.
Sorry. You didn't miss much, no. But at any rate, early morning, late evening, or late afternoon classes, students are reluctant to speak out, whether they're tired. I also feel sometimes that students aren't doing the reading.
Yeah.
And they don't want to out themselves for that. So those are sort of the things that I've faced in my teaching here at SMU.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else notice how your students are behaving or any speculations about why they might be hesitant to participate? And we'll return to all of this at the end.
Well, I would say for me, I teach really large intro classes, like 100 students per section. And, I don't want to cold call on my students.
Yeah.
So then if I make just kind of an open ask to the room of, what do you think about this? Then it's generally the same handful of 2 to 5 very confident students who will speak up. And so I find myself having to regularly remind, let me hear from somebody who hasn't spoken up yet. And even then, that's rare to hear from someone else. So trying to practice wait time, because I was also trained to be a high school educator. But there's only so much time I can wait before we need to move on. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
I also teach some big classes.
Like 2 intro bios back to back, 128 students each. And I don't I don't cold call, and I don't ask for volunteers. I do a lot of voting with your fingers, pointing up and down sort of thing. But even then, I'm like, come on, you can point up or down. Even then, I don't get a lot of pointing in any direction. And one thing I know that I really need to work on, and I was hoping for brainstorming, is sometimes I feel like it's because the questions are too easy. And I don't know what the mental block is there. If students are does that make them extra afraid to be wrong? Or are they this is not even worth my response? And then obviously sometimes they're too hard and they just can't answer. So for me, I know I have to think a lot about the difficulty of questions, which again, in a big intro class is what is the right level of difficulty for 128 students?
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges is that, we're all experts and it can be really hard to know when something that I think is easy for the students. In my class on Thursday, my introductory contemporary moral problems class really was not going well. The students were not really participating. We were talking about something. I had just shown them a 2-minute video that said the answer at one point in it. I had written out the premises on the board. There was a missing premise that I thought was going to be really obvious. I asked them for responses. I got nothing. And so I just straight up said, I tend to be very, very transparent with my students. And I said, this is early in the semester. I don't know what's causing you to hesitate. I don't know if it's that you don't know the answer or that you know the answer, but you're afraid of being wrong or hesitant to speak up. Everybody, please close your eyes and bear with me. Put up 1 finger if you just don't know, you have no clue what the answer is, and 2 fingers if you think you might know what the answer is, but you don't want to say it. And I was expecting a lot of people would put 2 fingers up because I thought this is really easy. Students in past years got this pretty easily, but the whole class put up 1 finger. And I thought, okay, this is not as easy as I thought, right? This is something that I had totally misjudged the level of difficulty. And the bigger the class, the harder it is sometimes to figure that out. Any other thoughts about this? Yeah.
I suspect my students are a little bit atypical. Most of my students are graduate engineering students, and many of them are actually working or have been working for some time. Now, those students that are on campus and are juniors, seniors, they tend to be a little bit more quiet. The ones who have been out working, engineering often has a culture of challenging, asking questions. So I find those that have been out in the working world are a little bit more willing to speak up and ask questions. A lot of it does depend upon what is the discussion topic, though.
Yeah. So it's going to depend on a lot of things. Depends on the topic and previous student experience. I find sometimes with my students, they don't want to look bad or weird. We'll put weird in scare quotes in front of their peers. Or at least I'm getting the sense that they feel awkward speaking in front of peers, especially if it's a topic that is even remotely political, morally controversial, something that they're worried about what their peers might think of them. So I should say first that I'm presuming right now, for the sake of audience, that increasing students' ability and willingness to participate in classroom discussions is valuable and a goal we're trying to pursue. But I actually think we shouldn't take anything for granted, and that it would be worth maybe at another time thinking more, or later in this session, thinking more about whether that's always true. I think classroom discussion is valuable and important, but it may not be the case that it's super important for every single student to be comfortable participating, depending on where students are coming from. If you can have participation via other methods, whether that's, something asynchronous like a discussion board, whether that's a written participation. I'm also not assuming, I don't personally assess class participation as part of a course grade, and we could talk later if you want about why I make that decision. I'm not really going to be focusing on that, but I think that these are things we shouldn't just be taken for granted when we're thinking about how we want to increase participation. So here's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to engage you in an activity with the specific goal of trying to approximate what it might feel like to be a student who has shown up unprepared and is uncomfortable with some aspect of class participation. This may feel bad for you, and actually I hope it does, but in a safe and productive way. So let's get started. Let's do a quick recap from last week's lesson about makeup. Can somebody remind the class where you contour? Come on, this is so basic. Where do you contour? Yeah, Addie. Around the edges of the face. I mean, maybe it's really not central. I mean, you really got to be paying attention to the most well. So that's true, but that's not what our book emphasizes. TikTok talks about around the edge of the face, but our book does not emphasize. Roseanne? Cheekbones. Contour and highlight along the cheekbones is most key. Justin, what is tight lining? No idea. Were you not here last class? You guys not. Anybody? Tight lining has to do with the waterline. Educated guesses? Come on, this is easy. It's eyeliner. Eyeliner when you put it on the what? Yeah, Roseanne's showing us on the waterline, right underneath. You know what? Let's move on from the makeup lesson. Let's talk about the main topic for today, which is, of course, RuPaul's Drag Race season 10. So let's start with episode 1. Can someone tell us why Miss Vanjie, aka Vanjie Vanessa Mateo, why her exit from season 10 became so iconic? Roseanne did the reading. She knows this one. Aria, do you know? You don't remember. What was so iconic about, I'll give you a hint, Miss Vanjie. You don't remember? She got eliminated first, and instead of just walking off the stage, she repeated her name over and over, walking backwards. She went, Miss Vanjie, and walked backwards, and everyone thought it was really funny. And question, when everyone was laughing at her, were they laughing at her or with her? What do you think? With her. I think it was probably with her, because it became a meme. She booked a lot of gigs after this. And of course, then what happened after? What happened in season 11? She was not a judge. No, come on. How could she be a judge? How could someone who got eliminated first be a judge? Come on. That never happens. Somebody said it. She came back. Yeah, she came back. And how did she do? She didn't win, but almost. She came in 5th. But she did have a lot of success. Let's talk about lip sync stunts. What do you think is the most iconic lip sync stunt of all history in RuPaul's Drag Race franchise? Death drop, yeah, but they're very common. Wig reveals. Roxy Andrews' wig reveal in season 5. She pulls her wig off, and everyone's shocked because you never pull your wig off during lip sync, and what's underneath it? A second wig. And since then, lots of people have imitated this, even up until 3 wigs, right? Very iconic. Outfit reveals. What do you think is the worst failed lip sync stunt that has ever happened? This was also season 10, so you all should know this. Butterflies, yes. Butterflies. What happened to the butterflies? They were dead. Asia O'Hara, who's a drag queen from Dallas, was going to release live butterflies from her robe, and she goes like this, and the butterflies all fall dead to the ground. And then later she had to make a notes apology and a donation to the ASPCA. It was kind of a mess. I'm almost forgetting the hybrid participants. Let's see. Who, folks on Zoom, who do you think should have won the snatch game of RuPaul's Drag Race season 10? Eric or Megan? Who should have won? You could answer in the chat if we can't hear you. Megan clearly did not do the reading, but you know, that's fine.
Sorry,
That's
I didn't
fine.
do the reading this week either.
Eric, any thoughts?
I didn't do the reading this week.
He didn't do the reading either. This is very disappointing, guys. You know, this is going to be on the final. This is very, very important for the philosophy of RuPaul's Drag Race. This is going to be on the final. And if you can't remember Aquaria as Melania Trump in the Snatch game, where of course they are imitating celebrities in season 10, you're really not going to do very well on your next paper, I think. So talk to your neighbor, talk to the person sitting next to you about what you would do on the Snatch game if you were a contestant. These are not very productive discussions, y'all. Not very productive. Can we report back to the large group? What would you do on the Snatch game? Anybody have answers? No? Oh, this class is so disappointing. Okay, exercise over. Drag Race teacher persona gone. Alita persona back. This was not the most productive class discussion. You all were not answering that much. What prevented you from participating? Why didn't you participate? You've never seen the show.
Also, if you know something and nobody else is answering, you don't want to answer it.
Yeah. You don't want to answer if you're the only one. So most of you have not watched RuPaul's Drag Race season 10. It's clear, except maybe Roseanne and Rachel have seen some of it. But also it's been a while, right? That was from 2018. I didn't update this. I did this exercise for a group of philosophers back in 2018, and then I decided not to update it on purpose because I think this is reflective of some times where like, yeah, I don't need to update this lesson plan. Maybe it's not as current as it needs to be. That's not always the best for students. But yeah, you have no background knowledge. If you were somebody who watched the show, it makes you feel really awkward. If you were the person who did the reading, because then everybody's looking to you. Why else couldn't you what I was doing? I was leading the conversation badly on purpose. So what was I doing that was bad?
Very fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you asked us to turn and talk, it was like, it felt like 10 seconds before you were like, okay, what y'all say? Like, okay, nothing.
Yeah. So it was super fast. You had no background knowledge. I didn't give you any time to really talk with each other in small groups. What else did I do badly? Yes. I insulted you. I said you were a bad class. I was kind of offended that you didn't know. I was calling you out, saying you were going to do bad on your exam, right? Because you didn't know this.
But not just as a group, but also individually. Like,
Yeah.
you didn't district. Also, Eric mentioned a lot of information, but attention to factual type questions. So we're comfortable with that.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I had forgotten the answers to these questions before I looked back at my old lesson I had written in 2018 about who impersonated who on the different elements of the reality competition. What else did I do badly?
You continued going, even though the students were not responding. I think that it would have been a good time to kind of stop and maybe give a little bit of the background knowledge or allow the students to kind of like pivot, you know, a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. If that were a real class, if I was really teaching a class on Drag Race season 10 and it became clear that none of you had watched it, it would be ridiculous to keep pushing through with this. Instead, I would say, oh, well, if you don't know, Drag Race is a drag reality competition show and there's a bunch of contestants and they dress up and they're judged on all these different things. And Snatch Game is a cheeky pun on Match Game where they have to dress up like celebrities and they impersonate a celebrity and do this matching game. And they lip sync, which is where you dance and move your lips without singing the words. And, this is how you have eliminations. And I could have explained this in a way that might have at least made you able to understand what I was talking about. How did y'all feel while I was doing that? Yeah. Felt lost or confused?
It did feel like the purpose was discussion, right? Because you would, like, for example, the death drop thing, you just said, no, that wasn't, you just said, no, that wasn't the answer, and then we moved along. So it seems like if the purpose was discussion, maybe we would talk about even the wrong answers a little bit more before moving on.
Yeah. So first, I treated a completely subjective question, what is the most iconic lip sync stunt, as if it had an objective answer, right? And then when you gave a reasonable subjective answer, I just completely dismissed it and moved on. This was obviously very over the top, right? But the goal here is to think about what kind of situations might this be analogous to for our students. So think about how you felt if I'm calling on you directly. And I framed this by saying, like, we're going to do this exercise and I'm going to try to make you feel bad. I toyed with the idea of just not even introducing myself and immediately starting with this to try to make you feel even worse. But I think that we can think about what was preventing you from participating in that exercise and what sorts of situations might students be in that might be similar. And I have some handouts if you wouldn't mind helping with those. So what ways that we might be leading an actual class might be analogous to some of the challenges that prevented you from, and some of them are going to be very direct comparisons. Some of the challenges that you were encountering trying to participate in my drag race class. Yeah, Aria. Sorry, you need the mic.
I teach world languages, but these were students in a finance class. They were in the same class and they were kind of swapping notes about how it's very frustrating for them that this semester they're being asked to watch videos before coming to class and then doing like a little pop quiz when they get to class. It's supposed to spur discussion and then, and I was like, well, that's a kind of a flipped methodology. There's a reason behind this. Like, why do you think she's having you watch these videos before class? And they're like, we don't know, but we don't know what we're supposed to be paying attention to when we're watching these things before class. And so in the case of RuPaul, like not just telling us to watch season 10, but maybe giving us some questions to think about while we watch it, like,
yeah,
would have been helpful so that it's not just like we're guessing at what you think the importance of the season is, but that we're being guided through a process of thinking about it through a certain lens.
Yeah, I think that's super, super important, right? So why are you doing this? If you feel like something is busy work, you're not going to be motivated to do it. I mean, think about all of the times you've been on some university committee and there's some work and you're like, this is at the bottom of my to-do list. This is the last thing I want to do because this seems pointless, right? I don't understand why I'm doing this. And if our students, we understand why we're giving them assignments and what we want them to focus on. But if they don't know that, they're not going to read. I'm going to do a presentation later in the semester about encouraging reading. They're not going to read. And they're not going to feel motivated to even try to participate if they don't understand what the point of it is. It's going to sap them of the skills, the ability to participate, and the motivation, I think. I think most obviously, I'm trying to get you to be in the position of the student who hasn't done the reading, right? Who doesn't have background knowledge, who doesn't know the terminology. I'm using a term like death drop, and you don't know what that is, right? Because that's some drag specific terminology. Oh gosh. I wish. I wish. It's where you go from a stand to immediately dropping on the floor with one leg straight and one leg bent. Like you kick back and you're just on the floor. It's very impressive. And there's absolutely no way I could ever do it. Um, questions moving too quickly, presuming knowledge, having missed the last week's class, feeling awkward about sharing topics about, or sharing your opinion about something either that you don't understand or that you don't want to admit to in front of your peers. I think that for all of us who became academics and, are in the world of academia, we think like, why wouldn't you want to admit that you know something? It's good to know something. But it can also be weird or uncool to know something and to be the only student in the class who has done the reading. That can be socially awkward. And maybe I don't think anyone should be embarrassed to admit to being a Drag Race fan, clearly, but maybe somebody might be. Drag is politicized. It's something that is controversial for some people. It's something that, you might not want to openly talk about if you're the only person in the class who's talking about it. And so I think sometimes students may be in similar situations where we're asking them to talk about things that either they're underprepared for or they don't really want to admit to knowing about, if that makes sense. Other thoughts about ways in which there might be analogous situations that our students are in? What about the question of what can we do to be better? What could I have done to actually have a good conversation with everybody about RuPaul's Drag Race? A conversation that would include people who have never heard of the show before and people who have seen all the seasons. Is there anything I could have done?
Leveling the playing field, right? So maybe you don't show a full episode of Drag Race because you have limited time class, but if you're talking about something specific like the Snatch Game, maybe you just put a little clip
Yeah,
of the Snatch Game.
totally.
And then you guide the discussion based on what they just saw in the Snatch Game. So everybody's talking about
Yeah.
the same thing that they just watched.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I show a 4-minute clip from an episode, then the people who are the super fans recognize it, they can engage with it in a deeper way, but the people who have never heard of the show before can still be engaging with it, and I can ask you questions about that episode. So that background, depending on what you're doing, I mean, it might look like review, it might look like a new example, it might look like a video. I'm always surprised how students sometimes seem to pay more attention to a video saying the thing I was just saying than to me saying the thing I was just saying. And I sometimes think, that's what I was just saying. But it helps to reiterate it sometimes with a video, especially if there's an animation or something like that. What else could I have done for it to be better? Yeah. Rachel.
There's some more like structure for the discussion. I'm just trying to think back, like even the first question about contouring, it's like I could have answered that question, but I was just really analyzing why I didn't. And I think there's always this instinct when we first get in a new space that we want to feel it out. We want to know the pace of the answer. I want to know like how many answers you're gonna get from the audience. So maybe structuring it somehow, saying like, I'm gonna ask this question and either I want you to talk for this amount of minute and I want 3 different answers. Like I would have been so much more likely to raise my hand if I knew you needed 3 from the room. But some structure that lets me know, this is the pace of the discussion. This is how many examples I'm looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good suggestion, right? Some structure, know what to expect. Hey, we're going to review the last class where we talked about makeup techniques for making the cheekbones of your face look different. Remember, one of the most important ones was contouring. I'm going to ask you what you remember about that. Let's get a few suggestions and then we'll move on, right? Then people know. Someone already mentioned I went super fast on purpose. I also was not writing anything down. I didn't give you a handout about this, right? The visual aid doesn't have to be fancy. I don't make PowerPoints myself. I have Word document handouts that I display just like this. I'm not usually writing in them because I'm writing on the board, but I have a handout that's on Canvas. Maybe it's a handout, maybe it's a PowerPoint, maybe it's just writing a term on the board. If I had written contouring on the board, right, and then that grounds us a little bit. If I had written a definition of, what a death drop was on the board or something, we can start thinking about it together. Other thoughts about strategies we could take to welcome in people?
Well, I was going to ask a question that I think you said you might address later. Like, I guess I'm sort of wondering if it were not something I was just introducing,
Yeah.
right? Then, like, if they were supposed to have done reading and they're like consistently not doing reading, then, like, I guess obviously as a teacher, I need to revise my approach and figure out how to get them to do it, or figure out how to flip it so they can do some stuff in class. But like in that example, I think some of these answers are really some of these answers are addressing the problem as a whole and some are addressing one problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that does. So, it's one thing if I'm introducing a topic for the first time and I wanted them to do some background reading on the topic. Not everybody has done it. I can kind of fill that in. You can ask some questions that require having done the reading and some that don't, right? Like I could have said, okay, the Snatch game is a celebrity impersonation game. Think about what celebrity you might want to impersonate. Here's a list of examples of the ways people have done it in really creative ways where, they pick a historical figure and then just do whatever they want with them. And you can impersonate whoever you want. You don't have to look the same way the celebrity does. It's more about the vibe. I could explain that. I could say, for example, if I was going to do it, I might impersonate so-and-so. Who might you want to impersonate if you were doing this and why? Right. So like that's something that is the kind of discussion question where the people who have done the reading, who have watched a bunch of Drag Race episodes where people do this game, could be drawing on, but then new people can be invited in. But that doesn't respond to your core question, which is, what if you've assigned them a text and the goal for the class is to talk about the text and they just haven't read it? And I think that there are ways to respond to try to minimize that, but that's not always going to succeed, right? And there's a pitch for something about increasing reading that I'm going to be talking about later in the CTE series. But you can try to assign readings that are reading students are likely to do. You can sometimes you have to assign readings that they hate because that's what's essential for your class, right? You can think about ways to increase student motivation for reading, but sometimes they're just not going to have read. And so what do you do in class? So what I will sometimes do is have us look at some quotations together in class. You can assign different kinds of graded or, I often just grade for completion homework to kind of incentivize the reading. But if they haven't done it, how do you get them to talk when they haven't done the reading? I think option one is you explain what they need to know and then you talk about it. Option two is you talk about something else, something that's connected and that doesn't essentially require having done the reading. And that's going to be more feasible for some kinds of classes than others, I think. Does that address what you were asking? I want to make sure I understood what your question was, and I'm not 100% sure I did.
So how can we do better? Give background in class. All that stuff can happen before the reading, right? Well, I guess it can happen after the reading as well. But if they haven't done the reading, it's not background anymore. It's just telling them what their homework should have been.
Yeah, that's right. But
I just like, I'm trying to sort of figure out the value of reading outside of class versus the value of reading inside class. They do very different things.
yeah, I think that's definitely right. And I think that the way I try to think about it is, you don't want your class to be giving, it will completely demotivate students to read if every single thing in the reading you lecture about more clearly than the reading in class, right? Why would any rational person read if they're just going to get everything given to them in a clear, wonderful way in class and they won't need to have done the reading? So it's this tension between wanting to give students enough. And when I say background, I really mean telling them what they should have read, because even if they've read it, they may not have understood it, right? So explaining what they've read is included when I say background knowledge. I'm using this really broadly. but it's a tension between not trying to make sure that there's something still valuable about doing the reading outside of class versus making the class a space where people who haven't done the reading are not going to skip that day. Like they can still get something out of it. And I think that this is going to depend on what your goal for an individual class is. So when I teach Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, I have students do this method called Think Aloud, where you're reading through the text and you're narrating your thoughts about it as you go. And I have them do it in pairs. And we spend a lot of time in class going directly through the quotes because I think the actual writing is really important, right? How the ideas are put together. I also think it's beautiful. So I just think it's like a nice aesthetic experience to look at the actual writing. But, you know, we're really digging into the text and seeing how the text translates. When I am teaching Kant's ethics and the writing is super, super hard, especially for advanced students, I don't honestly really care that much if they've done the reading. Like I tell them to try. I don't actually assign the original Kant anymore. I assign it as a bonus and I give them a textbook summary because what I care about is the idea. And we talk about the idea in a bunch of different ways in class. And it's great if they've done the reading. And if they haven't, frankly, I don't really care. So I think part of it is asking ourselves, what actually is the value in the reading? And that's sometimes a hard question to ask yourself, because if the value of the reading is getting content, and that's content that you're giving them 100% in lecture, I mean, what is the actual value added of the reading? If we can't answer that for ourselves, our students aren't going to be able to answer that. And this is not to say that there's no value added in the reading. I think there is, right? But what that value is going to be different depending on what your goal for that session is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my note to myself as you're writing, but also the goal is that they learn, right? They learn how to do things, but they learn the content and something.
Yeah. So, and I mean, if the goal is learning the content, then maybe they don't have to read, depending on what you mean by learning the content, right? If the goal is learning how to read a historical text, if the goal is learning how to take a philosopher's argument and figure out what they're saying, if the goal is working through difficult vocab, then the reading is absolutely essential. But if the goal is just content, I mean, maybe the reading doesn't matter, or maybe a different reading fills that's easier, fills the content goal just as well. I think
I was
you
gonna
had
say
your hands
that
up.
a good thing to do is to put students in mini groups or pairs and have them take 5 minutes to review the reading and then give them some guided questions. And then you usually get a lot more participation even from students that barely skimmed or didn't do the reading at all.
Yeah.
So in that way, you're showing them that you care about their answers, but you're also giving them some time to think about it, discuss it with their group, and then present on the opinion.
Yeah, I think that's super. That's a great suggestion. Justin, did you want to? Oh, there's two mics.
Yeah, Abby got me another one.
Excellent.
Seemed like you weren't really meeting the students where they were. You asked lots of
Yes.
factual questions that they didn't know the answers to, and be better to sense in advance what they're likely to know the answers to. And unless your goal is to embarrass them, not to ask a factual question that they aren't going to know the answer to.
Yeah.
And there are lots of other sorts of questions you could ask that are much more open-ended. And, can you brainstorm examples of this sort of thing happening in other places or other applications of this, or objections that people might make against this view, or just asking, giving them opportunities to ask about things that they're confused about or didn't understand fully. But none of those sorts of questions were among the ones you were asking.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And that was on purpose. I was just asking kind of straightforward factual questions. And those are the kinds of questions that you can't answer unless you have done the reading. Whereas you can ask them to, what if I had said, okay, it's clear that the group doesn't have as much background knowledge about drag as we thought. What are your questions for me about RuPaul's Drag Race, right? That could have been really productive. Or what other times in your life have you participated in some sort of competition, and what made it interesting? What reality shows do you like to watch, and why are they good, right? And how might this relate? There's lots of ways you can ask different kinds of questions. I think another thing that hasn't come up very explicitly yet is how you respond to failure, to people saying the wrong thing. You want to try to figure out, I think something that, and my students will explicitly say this, I was just reviewing the surveys I give students at the start of every semester. And one of the questions I ask is, how do you like to participate? And then I put in parentheses, talk in a large group, talk in small groups, participate in other ways. And many students this semester are telling me they don't like participating in front of the large group. And the reason they're saying this is because they're afraid of getting it wrong, or they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I think a lot of times when you have students from sort of that high achiever high school mindset, right, where you are in this mindset of you have to be doing everything perfectly, you have to be nailing everything, you don't want to say the wrong thing. So how do you make it a safe environment to fail? As soon as Addie gave me a great suggestion about contouring, which actually is true, you do contour around the face, you just don't contour as much on the, like the cheekbones are more important. I totally shot her down, right? And it is the sort of thing that would make a student feel terrible. I hope I didn't make you feel terrible. Maybe just don't do it. Right. But if you see me respond to her that way, no one else is going to make a suggestion that they're not certain about. Instead, I could have said, oh, that's a super helpful suggestion because there are these videos where people do this, and there is a way. Maybe we wouldn't call it contouring, but it's still helpful. Or I'm so glad you asked that. I use this one a lot. So-and-so, I'm so glad you asked that. That's such a common mistake students make. And it's the most common misunderstanding students have. And you're saving us from getting it wrong on your exam, right? Or your paper. Like, you can frame it in a way of that's a really common misunderstanding where you don't feel stupid or you don't feel like you've really gone wrong. And you can say, I'm so glad you asked that because I was forgetting to explain the difference between this. You can sometimes kind of tie it into yourself if you're in a positionality where you can do that. Not everybody is. But how do you make it an environment where wrong answers are helpful? Sometimes I'll just say, let's get it. We're talking about philosophical personhood. What gives someone the right to life and makes them a full member of the moral community? Let's get as many answers on the board as possible, including wrong answers. Let's get as many wrong answers as we can, right? Or what do some people think about a topic like, abortion? Why are some people in favor of it or opposed to it? You can let people distance themselves from their own view if it's controversial, if they want to. But I think that when the conversational environment is low stakes is when it can feel like failure is productive and possible. And one way to do that is how you respond to answers that are not correct, whether you can turn them around or respond to them positively. One way to do that is having people only talk to their peers, if that's a more comfortable environment. When I have students do a show of hands, for years I've been doing this now, I make them all close their eyes. And it feels a little weird to them at first, but then they actually answer, because when they don't, they go like this and they look around. And even for something super, super simple, like a thumbs up or thumbs down, they don't want to answer unless they can look at what their classmates are doing. So if everybody closes their eyes, failing can be more productive, I think. Other thoughts about anything we've been talking about? Questions? I mean, we're getting pretty close to the end of the session, so I want to just have an open opportunity for us to talk to each other about what we're struggling with in our classes, what's causing this culture of quiet, and how can we respond to this?
I do have a suggestion, right? So creating a rhythm from the very start, like thinking about the course design of the class. If discussion is something that's important, if you create a cadence with your class, maybe it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, and you say like Friday is always going to be our discussion day. So for Friday, you need to know the stuff that we talked about on Monday and Wednesday, and then it is expected on Friday there will be dialogue, there will be participation. And you can also include some like inclusive teaching techniques, right? Like the pass for now or pass, where he was like, okay, I'm going to ask a question and we'll start, with anybody that has a January birthday. And then we'll go February, March, April. So it's like you will be called upon, eventually. And the order is just your birthday. So just completely random.
And so they know when it's coming.
They know when it's coming, but like it's going to be in that order and it's random. And if it comes to them and they're not prepared, they can either say pass or pass for now. So you say pass for now. Once everybody's gone, you go back to that person. The other option is the pass, but then you can limit the amount of passes that a student has, right? So maybe like for the discussion class periods, they have one pass or two passes available. And then once they use pass, like it's no questions asked. You pass, I'm not going to go back to you again, but you have a limit to the passes that you have.
Yeah.
You know, but they know that on that Friday, that's what the discussion is. They need to come prepared and you know, maybe it becomes kind of like the rhythm and the cadence of the class.
Yeah, I think that's super. And what's really nice about that is the transparency, right? That this is exactly what we're going to be doing. When I have students talk in groups, I'll say, talking groups about XYZ, I want each group to come up with a suggestion. And we were talking in my class yesterday about echo chambers. What's an example of an echo chamber you've encountered in your life outside of politics? I want each group to come up with a suggestion, and then we'll ask each group to share their answer, right? So you're letting them know what to expect. And I think that pass and pass for now is really nice because sometimes people just need more time to think about an answer. When I was an undergrad, I had this, sorry, no, a grad student. You know, I was one of those undergrads who was always like sitting in the front, raising my hands all the time. I wanted to answer everything. And then grad school was a lot harder for me than undergrad. And I was not doing that because I couldn't think fast enough. I really needed a lot more time. And philosophers tend to prioritize thinking quickly on your feet. And I wasn't as fast. So I wasn't really participating in seminars. And my advisor once very well intentionedly came up to me and said, you know, I want to encourage you not to be so like embarrassed or shy and to participate in class. And I was too embarrassed to tell him like, not shy, right? I would be very happy to participate if I had something to say, but I just don't have anything to say because it's moving too fast, right? So thinking about the pass for now, I really like because it lets people who are in that position of I just need more time be able to come back to it. Okay. Everybody, this was great. Thank you. I hope this was helpful. I would love to keep talking to anybody about all of this who wants to keep talking about it. My email is on the handout if you want to get in touch with me. If you want, I'll be doing other sessions later in this semester about reading, about transparency, and about general pedagogical techniques. So hopefully I'll see some of you all there. And thank you so much for participating.